The calendar on the kitchen wall had a red circle around the date. 3 weeks. That was all that stood between Clara and the life she had planned for years. The apartment was filled with wedding magazines, fabric samples, and half-written to-do lists. Everything looked perfect on the surface. Ethan stood by the counter, scrolling through his phone while pretending to listen as Clara talked about flower arrangements. He nodded at the right moments, smiled when expected, and said, "That sounds great," more times than he could count. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that something inside him felt unusually quiet. Clara noticed the silence, even when nothing seemed wrong. She had learned to read Ethan's pauses, the way his eyes lingered too long on nothing. Still, she chose not to ask. There was too much excitement, too many people watching, too many expectations hanging in the air. Later that night, lying in bed, Clara stared at the ceiling while Ethan's breathing slowly deepened beside her. She tried to picture herself walking down the aisle, tried to feel the joy everyone said would come naturally. Instead, a question formed in her mind, soft but persistent. Was this happiness, or was it habit? She turned slightly, careful not to wake him. Ethan shifted anyway, opening his eyes for a brief second. Their eyes met in the dark, and they both smiled automatically, as if practicing for the future. "Everything okay?" he whispered. "Yes," Clara said quickly, "just tired." Ethan closed his eyes again, but the word forever echoed in his mind, heavier than he expected. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that two people were counting down to a moment neither fully understood. The days that followed were filled with routine. Morning coffee, shared jokes, quick kisses before work. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, both Clara and Ethan were having conversations they never spoke aloud. Clara sat at her desk during lunch, watching couples pass by the cafe window. She wondered when love had started to feel like a checklist. She loved Ethan deeply, but love no longer felt like a question, it felt like an obligation she had already agreed to. That evening, Ethan suggested dinner with friends. Clara smiled and agreed, even though her stomach tightened. At the restaurant, laughter filled the table, and someone raised a glass to the upcoming wedding. Cheers followed, warm and loud. "You're so lucky," a friend said. "You've got it all figured out." Clara laughed politely. Ethan squeezed her hand. Neither corrected the statement. On the drive home, the car was unusually quiet. The radio played softly, but neither of them paid attention. "We should finalize the seating chart tomorrow," Clara said. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Tomorrow?" The word felt distant. At home, they brushed their teeth side by side, mirrors reflecting familiar faces that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Clara wanted to ask if Ethan was happy. Ethan wanted to ask if love was supposed to feel easier. Instead, they said goodnight. As Clara turned off the light, she felt the growing distance between what they showed and what they felt. Ethan lay awake, staring at the dark, realizing that silence had become their safest language. And yet, neither of them was ready to break it. On Saturday morning, Clara went alone to meet the florist. The shop smelled like fresh roses and eucalyptus. As she waited near the counter, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan saying he'd been called into work. She sighed, telling herself it didn't matter. "Clara?" The voice came from behind her. She turned slowly, her breath catching. "Lucas." He smiled, older but unmistakably the same. The years seemed to disappear in an instant. "I didn't know you lived here," he said. "I didn't know you were back," Claire replied. They talked awkwardly at first, exchanging polite updates. Lucas mentioned he had moved back after years abroad. Clara found herself listening more closely than she intended. "You're getting married," he said, noticing the folder in her hands. "Yes," she answered, a little too quickly. "That's great," he said, though something in his tone hesitated. They sat for coffee nearby, telling themselves it was harmless. Memories surfaced, quietly late-night conversations, shared dreams, the kind of connection that had once felt effortless. Clara felt both comforted and unsettled. Later that day, Ethan met an old colleague by chance on his way home. They talked briefly, but Ethan's mind wandered. He felt restless, as if something had shifted without explanation. That night, Clara told Ethan about Lucas. She kept it casual, leaving out the emotions she didn't understand. Ethan listened, nodding. "That's nice," he said, but as he turned away, he felt a sharp, unfamiliar jealousy, not of Lucas, but of the certainty Ethan once had about love. The following week brought tension disguised as normalcy. Small disagreements surfaced more often, no longer brushed aside with laughter. "You forgot to call the photographer," Clara said one evening. "I said I'd do it," Ethan replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "I know, but everything keeps getting delayed." "So does everything have to be perfect?" he snapped. The silence that followed was heavier than the argument itself. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the television playing to no one. Clara folded her arms, feeling unheard. Ethan rubbed his temples, feeling cornered. "It's not about perfection," Clara said quietly. "It's about commitment." Ethan looked at her, realizing the word meant different things to each of them. Later, as Clara lay awake, her thoughts returned to Lucas not as a choice, but as a reminder of how love once felt simple. That scared her. Ethan stayed up late in the kitchen, staring at the wedding invitation on the table. He imagined his life 10 years ahead, trying to see himself clearly. The image felt blurry. The next day, another argument followed, this time about where to live after the wedding. Different dreams emerged, ones they had never fully discussed. "Why are we only talking about this now?" Clara asked. "Because we never slowed down," Ethan answered. The realization lingered between them. The plan they had followed so carefully was starting to crack, revealing questions neither had wanted to ask. The word forever followed them everywhere. On advertisements, in conversations, in quiet moments alone. Clara walked through a park after work, watching a couple argue softly near a bench. She wondered if that was love to the kind that stayed even when things were hard, or if it was simply fear of starting over. She remembered being younger, believing love would always feel certain. Now, certainty felt like pressure. Ethan drove aimlessly that night, replaying moments from their relationship. He loved Clara. That was undeniable, but love alone no longer felt like an answer. He imagined saying his vows, standing in front of everyone he knew. The image filled him with pride and with doubt. When they met later at home, the distance was impossible to ignore. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. "Do you ever feel scared?" Clara asked suddenly. Ethan hesitated. "Yes." The honesty surprised them both. "I thought I was the only one," she said. They talked carefully, choosing words like fragile glass. Fear of regret, fear of disappointing others, fear of losing each other. But some questions remained untouched. That night, they slept facing opposite directions, each carrying the weight of a future that no longer felt guaranteed. 2 days later, the conversation finally happened. Ethan came home early. Clara knew immediately something was different. "We need to talk," he said. They sat down, hands folded, hearts racing. "I don't know if I'm ready," Ethan admitted. "Not because I don't love you, but because I don't know who I am inside this future." Clara's eyes filled with tears she had been holding back for weeks. "I felt the same," she whispered. "I thought it meant something was wrong with me." They spoke openly for the first time in years. About expectations, about silence, about how easy it had been to keep moving without asking where they were going. "I don't want to lose you," Clara said. "I don't want to lose myself," Ethan replied. There was no solution, only truth. When the conversation ended, nothing felt resolved but nothing felt hidden anymore. The final days arrived with unbearable speed. Family called. Friends checked in. Dresses were fitted. Smiles were practiced. Clara answered questions automatically, her mind elsewhere. Ethan moved through his days like an observer in his own life. They avoided heavy conversations, as if silence might protect them. One night, Clara stood alone in the living room, holding her wedding dress. She imagined walking away. She imagined walking forward. Both felt terrifying. Ethan sat outside on the steps, listening to the city. He realized that courage didn't always mean staying. Sometimes it meant stopping. The night before the wedding, they shared one last quiet moment together, sitting side by side without touching. "I'm glad we told the truth," Clara said. "So am I," Ethan replied. Even if the truth had come late, the morning arrived calmly. Sunlight filled the room. Everything was ready. Clara looked at herself in the mirror, breathing deeply. Ethan stood in another room, adjusting his suit. They met privately before the ceremony, away from everyone. "I love you," Ethan said. "I love you too," Clara answered. They understood what those words meant and what they didn't. When the moment came, a choice was made, not out of fear, but honesty. The guests never heard the full story. They only felt the silence, the pause, the truth that love sometimes asks for courage instead of promises. Clara walked away knowing she had chosen herself. Ethan stood still, knowing he had done the same. They were almost married, and for the first time, that felt like the right ending.